Good afternoon. My name is Patricia Mullen, Patsy Mullen from Cambridge Trust. I oversee the Treasury Management Group here, and I want to thank you all for joining us. On behalf of the Cambridge Trust team, thank you for spending your precious time with us for this very timely topic, cybersecurity. We are all experiencing a rise in compromises these days, whether they are the fraudsters being successful or not. The reality is that they're here to stay, and they continue to find new methods on ways of compromising it. Rest assured, Cambridge Trust team takes this very seriously, and we're here today to provide you with best practices in identifying cybersecurity and the mitigation tools that are out there. My name is Patsy Mullen. I'm the Director of Treasury Management. I've been in the bank for over 15 years, and I have extensive experience working in the Treasury Management field, having been employed previously by State Street Bank and JP Morgan Chase, as well as Santander. And I'm pleased to introduce my two esteemed business associates, Walter McNerney and Peter Bamber. Walter?
Thank you, Patsy. As Patsy said, Walter McGurney, Director of Security. I've been with Cambridge Trust for 8 years currently. I've worked in the financial services industry in the Boston area for the past 25 years in different roles in security, fraud, and investigations. I also have my certification as a CFE, Certified Fraud Examiner. So my role is I'm responsible for investigating fraud. And lately, we've seen an increase in check fraud, wire fraud throughout the industry, identity theft, different scams, elder financial exploitation, and ATM fraud. So I'll turn this back over now to my colleague, Peter Bamber.
Thank you, Walter. I'm Director of Information Security. I hold a number of certifications in the field. I've been in it for well over 2 decades. Been at Cambridge Trust for a couple of years now. Very pleased to be able to help protect the information assets and of our customers and our employees. I have extensive experience in investigations, forensics, and incident response.
Thank you, Peter and Walter. I greatly appreciate it too, and I'm so pleased that we are being hosted today by Cambridge Trust with a star performer, Jeff Stutzman. Jeff is very well known in the industry, currently the founder of Trusted Internet, with background at the Department of Defense and Northrop Grumman. He is a frequent speaker on the topic, and we're pleased to have him here. So without further ado, Mr. Stutzman, take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Stutzman. Thank you for the introduction. And you need to let me share my screen over there, please. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. We got it. Okay, so you should be able to see the screen now. I'm going to go to screen to slideshow. Much better. So there's my team across the board. Adam used to run the Air Force Incident Response Team. Paul Wagner is actually a part-timer for us, but he's the head of IT for the University of Arizona. And he's also one of our chief information security officers that we deploy for every customer gets assigned a chief information security officer. All right. Okay, so this is one of the last slide, I think, on us, but one of the things that sets us apart is I hire senior people. Instead of people right out of college, the senior people know how to read kind of the gray area of the IT, right? So 83% of my team has master's degrees and 10 years experience. And usually it's in large enterprise experience. We've taken that and we turn it into smaller company stuff now. So we like to deal in companies that are under 100 people. We've got a few that are in the 300 to 500 range, and then one that's significantly larger than that. But when we take that big enterprise exposure down to the smaller companies, there's real value in that. So we do that. So bottom line is, this is what we are. We monitor things, right? So think about the car running down the highway. There's a be on the lookout for red Toyota Highlander. Every license plate reader in town starts going. Every easy path passes looking at these cars, and hopefully a police officer will stop them and figure out what's going on. Well, we do that in cyberspace. So we look at firewalls and we look at antivirus and we try to figure out what's going on, and we read the tea leaves and we get the intelligence and we put it in, and if we see something, we stop and examine it and decide how it goes forward. That's what we do. So here's just a quick overview of the threats. So this is kind of light, but it's still pretty good. So nuisance threats. A lot of these are just kiddie scripters, but that's like a mosquito, right? It's going to hurt a little bit, sometimes more than others, but you can take care of it pretty quickly. Criminal is theft, identity theft, fraud, botnets, password dumps, hacking as a service. And honestly, this is a high probability, medium damage event. So if somebody gets into your environment and they steal your data and they push it out onto the internet, there's privacy issues, there's financial issues, there's reputational issues, and this is where the vast majority of the attacks occur. Now, what you see down here in the bottom left is more targeted, but also criminal, and criminal as opposed to state-sponsored, government-sponsored, or warfare. So what you're seeing are things like large ransomware cases. In fact, that's the #1 right now, business email scams, corporate espionage. And then we move over here to what we're seeing now between Russia and Ukraine, which is state-sponsored warfare in cyberspace. Low probability, high damage. But this is what criminal stuff looks like, the opportunistic. This is one of our clients that let us use her name. I'm not going to give it to you here, but she, her Netgear home wireless router got overwritten with a keystroke logger. So every time she went to her bank account, somebody copied her username and password, and then screenshots of whatever she did when she was logged onto that account. Once they did that, they stole her telephone number and they ported it over from Verizon to Google. And now they had a username and password and a phone number. They could call the bank and change the PINs and, you know, get into the bank accounts, which is exactly what they did. So we get a call in February. It says, I've lost $82,000, or in March of 2019, I've lost $82,000. So, you know, basically we had to rewire the home. We put her on a new firewall. We got her set up. I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But this was an opportunistic event. Somebody was scanning a whole bunch of computers. They just happened to find that she didn't have a firewall. They went into her house. They found out that they had a wireless that they could exploit, and they did. And then they stole money from her. So on an average night, this is a 1 week period, but a lot of Bindi botnet usernames and passwords theft. GhostNet, Ghost Rat steals intellectual property and sets up a two-way communication, zero access botnet, same kind of thing. But these things are automated and they happen all the time, right through. I mean, you could see it in a 1 week time. We had 602 of those. We had 20 of these. They just continuously run until they find computers that are unprotected. And of course, you know, malware, ransomware, account takeover, they're the top 3 that we just talked about. Criminal and targeted events. Okay, these ransomware events are usually big numbers. I've dealt with ransomware cases from 700,000, which is kind of one of my smaller ones now, to as large as 40 million. And so these are typically very manual attacks, very well thought out. And when they get in, they create a lot of damage. In fact, this is what $100,000 in Bitcoin looks like. This is a company in Houston, Texas that we dealt with a few years ago. I made 7 of those exchanges into the internet in about a 2-hour period. We put $100,000 in, wait for it to clear, then you put another $100,000 in. At the end of the, you know, putting the last one in, the guy says, "Okay, thank you, see you." And we didn't hear from him for 3 hours. Company had been down for 4 days at a cost of about 25 million a day. They're just about out of cash. One more day would have been an extinction event for them. It's a $3.5 billion company, about 7,500 employees and 1,000 servers. Every single one of their computer was encrypted. We were able to get them back online, but it cost an after-hours wire and a little bit of sweat. Insider threat. This is one of the largest threats right now that people don't think about. So if somebody gets your username and password and they take over an account for an employee on the inside, that's an insider threat. If you've got an insider that's sending custom, you know, this privacy information to their home so they can work at night, not over VPN, that's an insider threat. If you've got disgruntled employees that are getting ready to leave, maybe the bottom 5% of their evaluations, or they've given you their notice, or you've given them their notice, that's potentially an insider threat. But there's lots of different categories. And then, of course, you want to know who's at risk. I mean, financial services, the largest, services next, retail. You can see this going down the line. And I've already sent out the deck. So if you'd like to look at this later, you're welcome to do that. And then government-sponsored warfare, advanced persistent threat. I mean, that's a copy of what looks like our F-35's Joint Strike Fighter. In fact, it says it right there. This is the Chinese version. And there are other things. I mean, it goes everything from pharmaceuticals to chemistry to Colonial Pipeline, which was a ransomware event, to data theft, or corporate espionage. A lot of countries around the world use their intelligence arm to do corporate espionage to benefit the companies in their country. And this is probably one that most people don't think about, is the threat from collateral damage. And so right now, we've got a cyber war beyond the physical space in Ukraine and Russia right now. There's a ton of stuff happening out there, and it's happening by a lot of folks who are using very simple tools, don't really know how they work. They're not really being done manually. They're pointing it at an IP address, pulling the trigger and hoping it hits. Now, here's the challenge, right? So in the UK or in Ukraine today, these red spots are potential openings for a cyber attack. So there are 1.5 million, 1.6 million results here. Now, these are all kinds of things, right? HTTP means open web. HTTPS, we open SSL, which is where you do your encrypted stuff. DNS is open on every single computer. Simple mail transfer protocol. All of us old people have SMTP still on their computers. The young guys pretty much don't. But here's the challenge. In the US, we have the same things that are open, except we have 262 million potential places that somebody could hack. And if you pull the trigger on an automated tool, or you're running an automated high-speed network called a botnet, they don't discriminate between the Ukraine or the US or anywhere else in the world. They're going to get what's open. And so we had this happen a few years ago with a ransomware case called NotPetya that went around the world, and WannaCry. So this is a big deal. So the collateral damage that could come out of this is pretty enormous. I'm going to just pause, look at that question quick. Okay, I'll leave that. All right, so look, this is what we normally see, and this is actually taken right out of the Netgear installation instructions, right? So you've got your internet, and you've got your cable modem, whatever that is, and then you plug in your wireless. And here's the deal. This is bad architecture, and bad architecture causes bad things to happen. And in the case of our woman out in the other side of the country, this router right here got overwritten by something that captures every username and password and pictures of things that happen when you go in there. So when you use those accounts, this is bad architecture. Now I want you to think about this for a second, right? So if you've got smart locks or security systems or home entertainment systems or garage door systems or whatever it is, if you can look at these things on your camera and you don't have some kind of a protection mechanism to keep only you to look at this, there's a high probability that others can too. So how would you think about the idea that you leave the house, somebody can open your garage door, potentially. Somebody can check to find out if the security system is registering movement in the house, maybe unlock your door. And so this stuff is real, and this is what it looks like, bad architecture. So we talked about this a second ago, right? It was that Netgear wireless that gave up the entire farm with this poor woman. This is interesting. During 2014 presidential election in Ukraine, the Russians used the smart televisions that had cameras and sound and things like that to be able to spy on Ukrainian residents. They used it to collect intelligence. They used traffic cameras to monitor movement. Cellular service was denied in a lot of different places, and they used texting for propaganda and psychological operations. But the idea that you could use a smart home or the tools in a smart home, like a smart TV, especially if it's got cameras built in, like the one I'm sitting in front of, these things can be used to spy on what's going on in the homes. And now, in 2022, we've got We've got camera systems, we've got Nest, we've got Ring, we've got all of these things that make life much easier and better for us. But at the same time, you have to remember, if they're connected directly to the cable modem, as the instructions say, they're vulnerable to attack, and people can monitor what you're doing. So I love this, right? So I did a job in the Midwest about a year ago, and I said to the woman, "Why did you bring me in?" And she said, "Somebody was talking to me through my camera." And I went, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Somebody was talking to me. I called my husband to tell him that somebody was talking to me, and he said, 'Get out of the house.' And when I hung up the phone to get out of the house, the person that was talking to me said, 'Don't forget to grab your purse. It's on the table next to the counter.'" And so we were brought in the very next week to go and take care of this. So here's the way this works, right? I'm going to just give you a quick lesson, Cybersecurity 101, but you've got to figure out how to protect yourself from that. Of course, this is a business too. This architecture works the same way. This is a firewall. It's really simple. It's a chain link fence built around your company or your home, and that's it. That's all a firewall is. It's very static. Now the problem is, to let people in, you got to open a door. And so once that door is open, the firewall doesn't discriminate on who comes through it. It allows them through. It just opens a door. So there's another piece that we built into these next generation firewalls, and it's called an intrusion prevention system. So now we've got the chain link fence and we've got the doors, and somebody comes through the door. We want to know that that thing that's coming through the door, animal, human, criminal, whatever, is okay. So we have a bouncer check it, and maybe a dog, and this thing will interrogate every single thing that comes through a door. And if it's good, it'll allow it through. If it's bad, it'll toss it out on its ear. That's it. So the next thing, let's say that the bouncer makes it, allows it through. Whoever was coming through was on the list. Everything's good, except it goes in and it sits down in the office, or it sits down at your dinner table and starts sneezing. Now you know you've got somebody or something that's infected. We protect against that with something called antivirus. So antivirus looks at the things that come into your house, come into your computer, and it tries to decide whether or not, based on previous, people getting sick, computers getting sick, whether or not this is valid. And if it thinks it's got a virus, it'll kill it. Intelligence, right? So I love this. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but intelligence tells the bouncer and the dog and the other tools, hey, this is what's important. And so you're going to see I've got valid accounts. All of the number one access across the board is people losing their accounts to something. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in a minute. But you want to be able to train these guys and let them know, hey, this is what the actual threats look like, so the bouncer and the dog have a good understanding of what's going on as they interrogate these things coming through. And then what do you do for email and systems in the cloud? Look, we use a tool called Avanan Proofpoint, Mimecast. There's others that you can use to plug in directly to your email system and interrogate the email systems for phishing and spam and things like that. But whether it's email or it's in the cloud, the systems work exactly the same way. All good. How often should we change our router IP address? So if you're on an automated process, it's going to do that for you. But I wouldn't worry too much about changing your router IP address. That's something that's a little harder to do. There are other ways you can implement this type of a structure. You're going to be in good shape. And here's what it looks like in real life. This is the way I do it. So when I was at Carnegie Mellon, I started thinking about what would we have to do to be able to protect homes and small companies and big companies using an architecture that could be standardized and scale. So I'm sitting in a house in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia right now. I live in New Hampshire, but I keep a place down here for work. And both of my homes have this infrastructure, so it doesn't have to be hard. It's a firewall. It costs about $2,500 with a 3-year license. I use an antivirus and an anti-evasion, anti-ransomware tool. And what we do with this is, one of the tricks that I like to use is we plug in the Russian language Cyrillic keyboard string. So if a Russians are scanning for a place to put ransomware. They don't typically hack other Russians. So when they see mine, it presents it as a Russian computer because they see the keyboard. So that's a nice little feature. We put VPNs on pads and mobiles that all come back to that firewall. So they're monitored internally. And then you can go out to the web, you can browse safely, you can do whatever you want, and you can do remote access back to your VPN. And of course, everything that we do is monitored 24/7. This is a baseline architecture, and we add in additional things like Avanan for email, like training. We use a product called KnowBe4, but this whole architecture is fairly inexpensive, and you can deploy it in your house. You can deploy it in any company and we've got this deployed in companies of one person, all the way up to 3,500 people. So it works really well. There's the firewall, right? So think about that firewall. It's the bouncer and the dog. It's got an intrusion prevention system plus the fence. It's got antivirus that looks at the network as it's coming in and out. It does DNS monitoring. It's like the DNS is domain name services, like the telephone book for the internet, right? So I'm going to call Google. I'm going to look up google.com 8.8.8.8, and that's their real DNS. And it's got to translate that for your computer. So we look at that, and then cyber threat intelligence we feed into this thing. It's hooked up right behind your cable modem, boom, straight into firewall, and then everything back here becomes protected. So it's magic. We talked about FortiClient Minerva's Armor. So FortiClient is the managed antivirus that we use. It's got a VPN connected to it. We can do automated quarantines if we see something go bad. So literally reaction time is very, very quickly. And again, this comes included in this package. So if you buy it yourself, it's no different than if I do it for you. Nice little way to go. Minerva's Armor, anti-evasion and deception, plus it gives us behavioral analysis. From a professional perspective, we just like that. Here's the thing that I'm going to tell you. Please, 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 if you don't do anything else today, if you have a free VPN service on your telephone, get rid of it now. Don't wait, get rid of it. If they're not charging you for the service, they're getting paid because they're selling your stuff. Either it's information about you or information that they take from you. So please get away from the free VPN services. Go out and pay the $10 a month to somebody that's going to do it. We do it, Nord does it. There's some really good ones out there, but the free ones you should never, ever use. Two-factor authentication, right? I'm going to show you that Intel slide just a minute, but right now, this is your first, last, and best, and probably cheapest line of defense. You could do Google authentication for free. You can load the client on your phone for free. You can buy it through Duo. If you're a small company, we use Duo to set up small companies. There are so many options out there, but this is the biggest takeaway. I'm going to just, table pound this one. It's a big deal. And then threats from email, of course, this is big as well. The Microsoft stuff that you get is okay, but you really, from a company perspective, you need to have something that augments that. We use Avanan. Physical security systems are the #1 thing that we see broken into every single time we deploy, especially video surveillance. And that's because video surveillance cameras oftentimes send unencrypted signaling back. And then on the back end, this thing is called the NVR, the Network Video Recorder. It's going to record 60 frames per second of everything that comes off these cameras. Now, if you've got multiple cameras, your NVR is typically going to be encrypted, but only when it's at rest, only when nothing is being pushed into it. When it starts to have to read and write camera signals coming back, it has to decrypt to do that. So when you're pushing 60 frames per second and you've got a whole bunch of cameras coming in, that NVR is really not encrypted at all. Same thing with the AI engines if they have them, or in the cloud they'll do them. So we make sure and put everything behind a firewall, and I would recommend that you do the same thing, whether it's in your home or your company. Put the video surveillance systems behind a firewall so that they're protected, and then enclave them off. And then have your IT people make it so that you've got to have a VPN to look at them. So you want to enclose these things, and I call it a clamshell. And once you get in, you're kind of in. But if you could set up that clamshell in a smart way, and this is actually the architecture that I did for a physical security company that does only encrypted video surveillance systems, and that's the way we set it up for them. So a couple of key takeaways, right? Number one, proactivity is so much cheaper than incident response. So we get brought in proactively, or we get brought in on incident response. Incident response is going to cost you 3 to 5 times more than a 3-year contract for monitoring and protection 24/7, hands down. And you're going to say, well, I've got insurance. Insurance gives you money, but it's not going to save your time, frustration, burnout, or data loss. It doesn't make you happy. It just gives you money. So it's so much easier to be proactive. Number two, physical security systems are almost never thought about as cybersecurity systems, and they are always hacked. I'm telling you, 100% of the time when we deploy, this is one of the first things that we see. Defense in depth, it doesn't have to be expensive, but it does need to be good, right? So effective and expensive are not necessarily in direct correlation. So this box, whether you buy one from us or you buy it on Amazon, it's going to cost you about $2,500 with a 3-year full-on cyber intelligence license and all of the things that you need to be able to do with it. And you get 10 licenses to be able to load, FortiClient or whatever you want into that. So it's not crazy expensive. If you use the way that we do, we set it up so that maybe you've heard something about zero trust. This is Microsoft's zero trust framework. And so what I did was just overlay the tools that we use. So the point here is, if you're going to go buy things, buy commercial grade for your companies and make sure that they fit into a zero trust framework, or at least know where they fit, because at some point in the future, you're going to be forced to do this. If you do any kind of work with the government, financial services system, SEC, Treasury, these guys all require it, and they're all heading for zero trust. So you need to be ready. So yeah, heightened security threats come from a lot of different things, right? Ransomware, business email compromises, physical security, home systems, and personal. Next, know your tools. So you can go out and buy the best tools in the world, but if you don't know how to operate them, or if you only use 10% of their capability, it's wasted money, and you're going to lose in a firefight with a hacker from Romania. It's really that simple. Of course, we talked about this already, right? Incident response is more expensive than proactivity. Have a plan. If you buy these things and you train and you go to school to learn how to use them, for goodness sake, take a half a day, tabletop an incident response, tabletop a ransomware where you've lost all of your things, right? One of the first things that I do when I go into a ransomware is I get the situational awareness as quickly as possible. And then I go sit with the executives and say, okay, I'm going to give you a couple of options, but I need to know that you can operate this business until I'm back online. And in some cases, if you're 100% encrypted across the board, the executives better know how to make payroll, how to collect money. You're going to have to go back to a legal pad, because chances are your financial systems are locked up, or you don't have any email, or you don't have a way to talk. You don't think about these things until you start to tabletop the way that you're going to operate. It's such a low cost, high payoff exercise. This is that slide that I'll tell you, if you're using passwords today, it's only a matter of time. And right now, the highest level of threat that we've seen since maybe beginning of Q4 last year, are stolen accounts, stolen usernames and passwords. And I was so happy to see this come out yesterday, because I typically don't really kind of believe DHS's intelligence, because it's usually really old and it's watered down. And so I just discard it. But I saw this and my eyes lit up like a kid in a candy shop, right? So 51.5% of the initial access came from valid accounts. How do they get them? Well, maybe you like reading Field and Stream online, and you go and you put in your username and password, but you use the same username and password at work or in an email or whatever, right? They test them. Or maybe somewhere along the line, something that you did at work using that username and password got leaked. Or, there's a million ways that passwords get stolen, or they come in and they take them, right? So there's a tool that I can run called Mimikatz that in 30 seconds will dump all of your usernames and passwords back to last reboot on your computer. You got to know how to thwart these things. So valid accounts for initial access, persistence, using valid accounts. I'm using a valid account. It's not going to get picked up by any of the defenses because the dog and the bouncer think it's a valid account. Same thing with privilege escalation and defense evasion, right? We just talked about that. So they get in with these valid accounts and then they use them to create PowerShells or remote desktop sessions or taking data. This stuff is inevitable. It's a lottery, and so I'm telling you right now, this is such a foot stomp. If you're not using two-factor authentication, and as near as 100% of the places that you go online, you are going to have a problem. And this is such a low cost, high payoff activity that, boy, I can't imagine why you wouldn't do this. If you've got, I left this in, this is the DFAR stuff, but the government now is coming out with this NIST 800-171 defense forensic or defense federal acquisition rules. We've been doing a lot of work in this, but here's the thing. You're going to have a 320 things that you're going to have to do to be able to qualify, to be able to do government work, to be able to interface with Treasury or Energy or any of the other guys that are out there, HUD, because they're all starting to adopt this model coming out of DoD. So just be prepared. All of these things that I tell you about right up front, the two-factor authentication, logging, firewalls, good antivirus, good anti-evasion, establish your incident response process in tabletop. That covers almost half of the technical requirements that are needed for any of these compliance requirements, and it's a quick win. And I'm just going to skim through these because I've just talked to them. So that's it. I am going to go off share, and I will answer any questions.
Great presentation. We've had a couple questions presented here, Jeff. One that's been answered. I just want to repeat it. How does an individual know their computer has a firewall? How do you know your phone has been taken over? Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. Okay, so that's two questions, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a firewall, you're going to have a box. It's going to, it's going to be either that big or a little bit bigger. But you got to go to your IT people and ask them that question. Hey, what do we have for a firewall? And is it a next generation firewall with the dog and you guys are going to go and ask if you got a dog and bouncer in your firewall? It's an intrusion prevention system, right? You're going to ask these questions, but that's the best way to do it. And then the second question was, how do you know if your phone has been taken over? I love that. So today, one of the biggest things that's happening on the phones is that they're using them for crypto mining. And so you can tell pretty quickly on a phone because it'll get hot and your battery will run down quickly. Other than that, the phones are really not so bad. There are a lot of good ways to protect it, but it's the mobiles and it's the laptops and it's the PCs. One of the things that I always recommend on the telephones is that you download a free copy of Sophos Intercept X for mobile, and it'll scan the apps on a daily basis and send you a notification and tell you. If you really think that you've got somebody on your phone, we can do forensics. Anybody can do forensics for this. You take it, we make an exact copy of it, and then we run through it with some automated tools to find out. But usually you got to be pretty sure because it's expensive.
Thank you. Another question, how often should we change our router IP address?
Yeah, so your router IP address, look, if it's a static IP, it's going to cost you some money to do that. Typically, it's much harder. Honestly, I don't typically worry about changing a router IP address. You could, but I typically don't because the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So there's an opportunity that if you change your router IP address, people who had that locked into their systems, their APIs, their whatever, they're going to miss connection with you. My preferred method is to build a straight up defense in depth process, like I just told you, and it doesn't have to be expensive. Changing your router IP address is painful, can be painful. What I would say though is along those same lines, you're going to have these things called service accounts that will go to those router IP addresses and they'll do these automated connections. And what I would say there is you want to do those at least once a year, preferably every 6 months, or if you're really ambitious, every 90 days, like you would a regular password, because there's no human intervention. They're just built into a database. It's going to call out to Cambridge Trust and come back. And well, I shouldn't have called you guys out, but anybody, right? Two companies going back and forth, or internally, the financial systems like to do this. They're famous for this. That's what I would recommend.
Great. Another question said, what programs should we implement multi-factor authentication on?
So I love Duo. I'm a Cisco Duo guy. The CEO of the company and I were founders of the HoneyNet project years ago. So I've known Doug for a long time. It is an awesome product. It's a good price, and it's easy to set up, and there's a lot of support. We also use LastPass. So for those things where you can't have two-factor authentication, we have to have a password manager, and that password manager has the capability in it to do two-factor authentication for some of these devices. So those are the two that I always recommend.
Fantastic. Are there any other questions from our audience here at all? Well, as usual, Jeff, a very good session here. Thank you so much. And thanks to our clients and prospects who are participating today. We appreciate your time. And please contact your relationship management team at Cambridge Trust if you wish to talk about a little bit more deeper dive into the treasury management services that we have that help mitigate the fraud to your accounts. You'll be receiving a summary of today's presentation from the bank. With some best practices. And again, thank you all for your participation. And Jeff, greatly appreciate your insight today.
Anytime. You're welcome.
Great. Have a great day.